Tony Thompson versus Luis Ortiz. And there's one thing that I can't get out of my head as I think about this fight. You know, Tony Thompson is a guy who's been kind of on his way out of the sport for some years now. When he fought David Price, people were thinking, you know, this is maybe the end of Tony Thompson's career. He's been able to rectify and keep his career on a certain path due to upsetting the odds time and time again. You know, we saw him upset David Price not on one but on two occasions. We then saw him upset Odlanier Solis on not one, not two occasions. Yeah, he's lost to some good guys. He's lost to Kubrat Pulev. He's lost to Carlos Takam. But he put in really, really spirited performances against those guys. You know, and I just wondered, when I saw him last time out against Malik Scott, I just wondered if that really was the end of Tony Thompson's career. I mean, don't get me wrong, he performed with credit. He stayed on till the end of the fight. He hurt Malik Scott. You know, he dropped Malik Scott. He was in the fight. It wasn't like he was demolished. But let's be honest, Malik Scott was a guy who didn't pose the same threat as an Odlanier Solis or a David Price. Malik Scott wasn't a bigger man. Malik Scott wasn't a huge power puncher. Malik Scott wasn't someone on the way up. You know, Malik Scott himself is someone who's had high-profile losses, and this was a kind of crossroads fight that Tony Thompson lost. And afterwards, Tony Thompson said that he would have battered Malik Scott had he been a few years younger. And to be honest, I'm sure he would have beaten Malik Scott. But for me, it just occurred to me, you know, Malik Scott is probably a bad loss in the context of Tony Thompson's career. You know, he's moving into his mid-40s and he's making comments that he would have won the fight had he been younger. And it just occurred to me, is Father Time finally catching up with Tony Thompson, and does he realise it? Because he then moved on to calling out Luis Ortiz, one of the most avoided heavyweights in the sport at the minute. You know, they couldn't get a fight for love nor money for Luis Ortiz. Ustinov, Dimitrenko, lots of names were banded around. Maybe Ustinov will still fight him, who knows. But regardless, there was no one stepping up to the plate, and Tony Thompson was actively calling out the fight. You know, Ortiz, he's with Golden Boy. Presumably they were willing to pay a few quid to get an opponent in. And it just occurred to me, is this Tony Thompson realising he's at the end of his career? Sorry. Is this Tony Thompson realising he's at the end of his career? Realising that maybe there's only one or two fights left, and taking advantage of the circumstance that Luis Ortiz can't get a fight to step in as a short notice opponent? Is this Tony Thompson trying to get one last decent payday on his way out of the sport? And I can't quite get that image out of my head, because, you know, the way Tony Thompson lost to Malik Scott, where he was simply outworked by the younger man, you'd have to think that at that point Luis Ortiz wasn't the logical comeback fight. You know, Thompson's clearly doing this for a reason. Maybe he sees a weakness in Ortiz. Maybe he thinks he can expose Ortiz. He's certainly exposed several hype jobs in the sport before. And maybe that's the route he's trying to go down here. Maybe he thinks there's something he can exploit in this fight. And, you know, who knows? But I just worry about Tony Thompson. You know, he's getting substantially older. We've seen him hurt in fights. You know, we saw David Price drop him. We know Vladimir Klitschko's hurt him. And for me, Luis Ortiz is such a fast starter. You know, he's one of these heavyweights who has an elite first round. You know, look at the pressure and trouble he put Bryant Jennings in the first round. It was a first round where he could have very easily stopped Bryant Jennings. And we've seen Ortiz get multiple first round stoppages. Possibly most memorably against Latif Coyote when he fought Latif. I mean, you know, he really poured it on in the first round. Tony Thompson, he's not the most athletic guy. He's not the fastest guy. I think Luis Ortiz is going to come straight at him in the first round like a bull in a china shop. And whilst Tony Thompson is defensive, whilst he's a veteran, whilst he's cagey and very, very experienced and tricky in there, I just wonder if Luis Ortiz is going to absolutely bore into him. You know, Thompson is usually someone who guys take a while to work out. Klitschko took a few rounds to work him out. Pulev took a few rounds to work him out. He's a southpaw. He's awkward. He fights long. But Ortiz, he's also a southpaw. He's a highly experienced amateur. I just wonder if Ortiz is going to just run straight into him and try and bowl him over. And, you know, Tony Thompson, he's come in off a bad loss in his mid-40s. at short notice. He's the kind of guy who's turned up to fights not in the best shape previously. You know, sometimes he looks very bloated on the scales. I could see Luis Ortiz getting Tony Thompson out of there in the first round. You know, Ortiz carries genuine power and he really, really puts it on you straight away. He's at his most dangerous in that first round. And I just think if there's any sort of question that Tony Thompson has taken this as one last payday and one last way out, could he feel the power of Ortiz and could he say, right, enough is enough, time for me to sail off onto retirement? Yeah, I might be doing Tony Thompson a disservice. He's a guy who's upset the odds time and time again. But at this stage of his career, at this age, coming off a loss to Malik Scott, you've got to wonder how much desire is left. Is this about the payday? Is this trying to get some money before you call it a day in your career? And I just wonder if he gets hit, if he feels the pressure from Luis Ortiz, will he just, you know, decide to end his career there and then rather than risking taking a beating? And I think there's a very high probability in this fight that Luis Ortiz stops Tony Thompson very, very early. Because, you know, whilst Tony Thompson is an awkward fighter from range, he is someone who you can kind of close difference on and stifle. I mean, look at the effect that Carlos Takam had there. And Thompson isn't the fastest guy. He's quite lumbering, he's quite slow at times. And I could really just see Luis Ortiz running through him. And, you know, that's a credit to Luis Ortiz because Tony Thompson's a guy I rate. You know, he's a very, very clever thinking fighter. And I just wonder if the momentum is so behind Ortiz and so against Tony Thompson at this stage. Yeah, with Luis Ortiz, he's a fascinating fighter. For me, the way to beat him is to use movement. Bryant Jennings fought a terrible fight against him, you know, getting up close and brawling with him. Jennings should have used his athleticism, used his movement, tried to drag Ortiz into deep water. For me, real concerns over Luis Ortiz's stamina. I actually thought Bryant Jennings was just starting to come into the fight and starting to cause Luis Ortiz problems at the time of the knockout. You know, for me, if Bryant Jennings had used his legs a bit more, kept Luis Ortiz honest for another 2 or 3 rounds and checked out what the Ortiz stamina was like going into the 10th round, 11th round, it could have become a really, really interesting challenge for Luis Ortiz at that stage. And I still think I would pick the elite boxer movers of this sport to beat Ortiz because I have questions about his stamina if he's chasing an opponent and if he's having to go the distance. And, you know, Tony Thompson is a very durable guy. You know, if you look at the fights he's been in, he's not someone with a bad chin. He's defensively sound usually. He's durable, and despite not being in the best condition at times, he's developed a style where he can get through fights. You know, use his experience to actually get through fights, despite the fact that he's not in the best condition. So, stopping Tony Thompson early is no certainty for Ortiz whatsoever. But I just wonder, even if Thompson does manage to drag Ortiz into the trenches in the 9th round, 10th round, etc., has Thompson at this point got enough snap to his offence to hurt or to outpoint a guy like Luis Ortiz? And for me, the answer is no. I must admit, I'm going to pick Luis Ortiz to win this fight by early to mid stoppage. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you take a bad loss to a guy like Malik Scott and then you call out Luis Ortiz, for me it's hard to believe that's genuinely because you think you're going to win the fight. For me, it's a payday. And with Ortiz and the way he starts and the threat and the power he brings, if you're there at short notice, not in the best shape, with that payday mentality, there's going to be a temptation to pull yourself out of the fight when you get hit, when you taste the power. And I think Luis Ortiz, the way he starts, the threat he poses in the early rounds, he will get Tony Thompson out of there. It'd be fascinating if it goes late, if Thompson can use his movement and keep it long. Let's see how the Ortiz stamina holds up. Regardless, I'm just not sure Thompson at this stage has the power, has the snap to really do enough damage to Luis Ortiz to make it a competitive fight. Thompson's a very good fighter, but Father Time is catching up with him right here, right now. Let me know your thoughts. Are you looking forward to this one? Is there any upset potential? Please hit the thumbs up button. Please hit the subscribe button. Many thanks for watching.